Many years ago, there existed a being that began to grow weary of its existence. Its body felt limited and restricted in movement, and the simple language it shared with other beings could not adequately express the paradoxical pain and emptiness it felt. Feeling particularly depressed one day, it fashioned out of wood and clay and a little bit of paint a puppet in its own image. It's a little bit harder than I thought. It attached a few strings and created this routine that was similar to its own. It lifted its head to signify waking up and mimicked the movements for eating breakfast and drinking coffee and brushing its teeth. Simple routine. Suddenly, the routine began to feel inspiring. Each day, the movements became more fluid, as if the puppet itself looked forward to waking up each morning. Eventually, the being wanted to add even more movements. It wanted the puppet to feel alive, so it attached more strings. Yeah. They tested the new movements slowly at first, as they got used to balancing and distributing the weight. But progress had accelerated now, and before they knew it, the being was making the puppet dance. And although the being itself could not dance like the puppet, it felt overjoyed at finally being able to express what had always been buried deep inside of its rigid body. And each day, the being lifted the puppet out of its slumber and reenacted the movements that made life make sense. Wake up, greet the day, have your breakfast and coffee, and then dance and let it all out. So, wake up, breakfast, express yourself. One more time. Wake up, have some energy, and dance, dance, dance. One day, the being began to feel the movements become more difficult to perform. It happened subtly, and then all at once. What used to come naturally now took much more effort and force to do, and soon the being became convinced that the puppet was resisting. Now it seemed as though the puppet was pulling the strings as well. Tired of the being's routine, the puppet found it harder and harder to get up each morning. Everything was always the same, and at this point, doing nothing felt the most inviting. Yet, it was not strong enough to fully resist the being's control. Any act of defiance it could muster, the puppet would do. The puppet no longer wanted to eat any breakfast, for example. The puppet no longer wanted to drink the coffee. When made to move right, the puppet would go left. And when the being wanted the puppet to sit, the strings would simply go slack. The movements that brought the being joy did not bring the puppet any joy. They became like the comedy and tragedy masks. When the being felt happy, the puppet felt sad, and vice versa. The only thing they could agree on was both feeling unfulfilled. The being was not sure what to do anymore. Try as it might, the simple act of expression it enjoyed so much turned into a struggle, and as the puppet tried to act of its own volition, the expressive movements turned into a defiant dance. Each resistance created tension, and this tension culminated in the strings crossed and tied together. The puppet, in turn, realized that the only way to truly be free of the being's control would be to cut the strings. But what it didn't realize is that without the strings, there was nothing holding it up. And try as it might, what was once a simple, routine movement every morning now was an impossible feat. Resigned to its fate, the puppet grabbed the string it had cut and attempted to tie it back on. But with only one hand, there was no way to hold it up and tie it at the same time. And on the third attempt, the string snapped away and out of sight. Frantic now, the puppet searched for its string. It looked over here, then over there, and it looked everywhere. And suddenly the puppet found something it wasn't expecting. Another puppet, just like itself. And this puppet, this marionette, also had a stringless arm. And in front of them dangled the loose strings. The marionette knew what needed to be done. It grabbed the puppet's arm and held it up so the puppet could tie the string. And then the puppet did the same for the marionette. Only afterwards did they realize that they had accidentally tied their own strings to each other. The puppet then remembered its other strings and pulled at those. The strings gave way as the being no longer tried to force any movements. And at the same time, they realized that everything is connected, and in order for things to work, everything needs to be connected. Invigorated, the puppet clasped the marionette's hand and pulled it close in order to dance.